find out what college football insider and expert Phil Steele thinks about BYU's September slate. What is a success, Phil, for BYU in September, given that they are looking at 4 big-time games?
You know, I think, as you mentioned, winning 2 of them would be, to me, a successful month. And really, when I studied all the schedules from all the teams in the country, the toughest September schedule out there is BYU. 3 road games against Power 5 teams in Nebraska, UCLA, and Michigan. Tell you a little bit about Nebraska. They're a team that I've got projected to contend for the Big Ten West title. Them and Wisconsin are going to battle it out. And it's also a dangerous place to play Nebraska in the fact it's the first game of Mike Riley's era. So Broncos got no information really as to what type of offense you're going to see Nebraska. Will they be still more of the option what they ran last year? Will they be more pass? That's tough for a defense coordinator to prepare for. UCLA, I think, is a legitimate top 10 team for the upcoming year, a potential top 10 team. And in Michigan, they are all excited. I think you're going to see a much improved Michigan team, one that with Jim Harbaugh as the head coach. So those 3 road games are brutal. And I'm not even discounting Boise State. That's a team that I think is a top non-Power 5 team out there. They're Fiesta Bowl champs from last year, and I think this year's squad may be even better. That's just a brutal slate.
Phil, our Twitter question today is, what's the most winnable game for BYU in September? We each had an opinion. Spencer said Nebraska. I said Michigan. What do you think?
I'm going to disagree with you guys. I'm going to go with the home game against Boise State. You know, you got it's a good Boise State team, but it is in Provo, and the good news here is Boise State's going to be breaking in a new quarterback. And when you look at new quarterbacks, generally the roughest game of their entire career is that first road start. So this is a first road start for a young quarterback at BYU. I think that that's the most winnable game of the 3. I don't think any of the 4 games are unwinnable. The one I would put the least chance of winning, though, is at UCLA. That team is loaded this year.
Phil Steele with us on BYU Sports Nation, college football expert and insider. He just picked Boise State as BYU's most winnable game in September, and with good reason at that. A starting quarterback, a new one, making his first road start. Which September games will BYU be favored in, if any?
The one they would be favored in possibly is Boise State. And, some depends on how BYU looks against Nebraska. If BYU goes into Nebraska and loses by 3 touchdowns and Boise blows out their opening opponent, they probably won't be favored. Right now, the power ratings are coming pretty close to even on that. I think a good effort against Nebraska and BYU would be favored in that. But I think they'll clearly be an underdog in the other 3. And, once again, when you look at Michigan, don't think 5-7, which was their record last year. It's an entirely different team, an entirely different attitude this year, and there's going to be a lot of momentum on Michigan's side heading into that one.
Phil, a lot of our discussion around BYU's 2015 season revolves around what win total would be good. What's the minimum benchmark for a good season? I have said around 8 or 9, maybe 8.5. What do you think about that for BYU's 2015 schedule?
I like 8. 8, I think, if Bronco can guide 8 wins out of here, I'm thinking good. I'm not thinking great. I'm not saying this one of BYU's better seasons of all time, but I think 8 wins out of this schedule. I mean, clearly playing a team like Missouri, which is one of the favorites in the SEC East on the road, Michigan, UCLA, and Nebraska all on the road. And then you look at a couple of these other games. They're quiet and under the radar. BYU fans may not be looking at them that close. The American Conference has Eastern Carolina and Cincinnati. I rate both those teams right at the top of that conference. And when you look at those 2 teams, a lot of folks will say, well, Eastern Carolina, they're losing their quarterback. They're not going to be that good this year. That's a system type of offense. And Kurt Benkert, who's their quarterback, he's a big kid. He's 6'3", 220. He's mobile. He can make all the throws. He's been in the system for 3 years. It wouldn't surprise me if he comes in and duplicates Shane Carden's stats from last year. So that's a dangerous East Carolina team. Cincinnati's pretty much a favorite to win that division. And I'm not even discounting the road trip to Utah State with, they've got their quarterback back in Chucky Keaton. That's going to be a dangerous game. So I think coming out of this schedule with 8 wins, I would count it as a good season.
We like star power, and BYU most certainly will face some stars with this schedule lined up in 2015. Who are some of the star players that BYU will compete against that fans should know about?
Well, one under the radar one, which I just threw out at you, Kurt Benkert of East Carolina. By the time that game rolls around, October the 10th, he's going to be among the nation's passing leaders. So that's going to be a very interesting one. With UCLA, they returned the Pac-12's leading rusher from last year, and Paul Perkins. He's not a household name, though. In fact, I don't even think he made the first 2 teams of the all-conference team last year, but he'll be much more known this season. Defensively, they've got names you know. Kenny Clark, Eddie Vanderdoes up front, Miles Jack. Everybody knows him. He's a linebacker that also plays running back. So they've got quite a few stars to look at in their team. Cincinnati has Gunnar Kiel at the quarterback spot. Gunnar Kiel could be one of the upper picks for the draft coming up if he has a big season. Last year he got injured early on and played better. And then, of course, Chucky Keaton. And when I talked to Coach Wells this spring, I said, well, how's Chucky going to do this year? And he seems to feel he's going to be close to 100%. If he can stay healthy all year, he may be putting up some big-time stats for Utah State.
Phil, it's hard to gauge national relevance, but can BYU be nationally relevant if they do win, say, 8 games against this schedule and future schedules that look to be maybe even tougher?
I think they would gain national relevance if they got into maybe the 10-win mode, which, once again, it's feasible. You can always paint that perfect case scenario. And last year, for example, BYU jumped out of the gate, beating 4 teams, including a couple of Power 5 teams and a pretty good Houston team as well. And all of a sudden, BYU was on everybody's tongue. They started looking at them. So I think if BYU was to pull a couple of upsets, let's say come out of September 2-2, 3-1, then they'll be much more in the national scheme of things. The thing that hurts them is they're already locked into a bowl game, so there won't be that opportunity to go to a better one unless, of course, they're the top non-Power 5 team. But I think folks around the country do follow BYU football.
Follow him at FeelSteele42 on the Twitter machine.
042.
042. Sorry, excuse me. Got to get the 0 in there. Now, we tweeted something out at the beginning of the show that has nothing to do with football, but rather Jerem's mustache game. And I want you to rate, from the picture that you saw, you responded to it, how would you rate Jerem's mustache right now, Phil?
Well, I have to be honest with you. I'm one of those tunnel vision guys that doesn't notice a lot of things. Okay, so here's what I'm going to say here. I can walk into a room. I would give you an example of what I'm talking about here. Walked in the kitchen one time. I told my wife. I said, "Hey, that's an interesting plant you have there on the table. That's pretty neat. Where'd you get that?" She goes, "It's been there for 9 months." I said, "Oh, all right." So, me looking at guys' mustaches, that would probably be the first guy's mustache I've looked at, and so I have to put it in my top 10. So I'll give him that, but I have to also preface it with that other details there.
Well, you rate it higher than I do, and I'm the I'm the Grambling of mustaches, I think. You've worked a long time on your magazine. We're very excited. I know it shipped out Monday for those who pre-ordered it, but what can people expect in your magazine this year?
Well, the great news is it's 352 pages. Once again, if you can't wait to get your hands on it, you can actually get it right now on iTunes and Google Play and download it. And the beautiful thing about that is if you get it on iTunes and or Google Play, then you have it on your device and you can carry it around with you. Whereas if you buy the magazine, how many times have you bought the magazine and by September this thing is all dog-eared, torn pages, it's all beat up because you're carrying it with you everywhere you go. Well, this way it sits on your desk and it stays fresher longer. So I would recommend ordering both versions. And if you get the iPad or Google Play one right now, you could actually be reading the magazine. But it's really, as usual, like getting 128 different media guides rolled into one. Any fact you want to know about the team, last 5 years scores, last year's game-by-game results, individual stats, last 10 years records, last 7 years, it's all in there. Most in-depth write-ups on each position out there. Projected starting lineups, just not a player's name and his height and weight. We give you a little bio on each player, and we usually go 3-4 deep. So really, it is like getting 128 different media guides rolled into one. Different ways to get it, but as mentioned, until July 1st when it hits the newsstands, or if you order through our offices on philsteele.com, the best way to get it right now is on iTunes or Google Play.
Okay, Phil, we want to get in one more question before you go. I know you told us about a lot of the stars that BYU will face. We're all about projecting and making lists. We know Taysom Hill is a world beater for BYU, and everybody's pointing at him as BYU's best player. What is the number one best player BYU will face on any team? Out of all the guys you just gave us, who is the star?
Let's see. it's tough to say. I think in the long run. Let me go on the long run. And
Okay.
it's once again, I like to go out of the box. You guys know that. I don't always go with the proven record, but I think in the long run, it's going to be Josh Rosen of UCLA. He's a freshman quarterback. He's just coming in, but I think when he comes out of college, BYU fans are going to say, hey, we played him, back in 2015. So I think as far as total potential to be the big-time star and get into the NFL, things like that, I would go with Josh Rosen of UCLA.
Phil, we wish you congratulations on all of your success in putting together another amazing college football preview. We look forward to reading the 352 pages of awesomeness. Thank you for ranking Jerem's mustache and for taking some time with us today.
Hey, it was a lot of fun talking football with you guys. We should do this more often.
Absolutely.
Definitely a lot of fun. All right, have a good one, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Phil. Follow him on the Twitter machine at PhilSteele042, a member of the College Football Writers Association of America, and the dude knows his stuff.